Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Overpeck, and I'm the Dean of the School for Environment and Sustainability. And it's wonderful to see such a big crowd here for our special guest. And I'm really happy that Shannan Gibb-Randall is with us as our lecturer. This lecture is in honor of Clarence Roy, who earned his landscape architecture degree here at the University of Michigan. He went on to fund the firm Johnson, Johnson & Roy, which is now SmithGroup, along with his colleagues Carl Johnson and Bill Johnson. Bill Johnson was actually a dean of the School of Natural Resources, which has become SEAS, and he served in that role for 8 years. So it was the donor's desire that the lecture be given by a U of M alum on a topic related to the theme of sustainability in landscape architecture. I guess you can do that, huh? Which is why it is so fitting that we welcome Shannan Gibb-Randall as this year's speaker. Shannan attended the residential college at U of M, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts from the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts in 1990. Having focused on art history and anthropology. In 1998, she graduated from SEAS, which was then known as SNRE, with a Master in Landscape Architecture. And if you've ever spent time in the Great Lakes Garden, at the Botanical Garden, in the courtyard at the Kellogg Eye Center, or Detroit's Old-Off Garden, then you've been surrounded by Shannan's work. I guess I've done 2 out of the 3. That's not too bad. As a principal of InSite Design Studio, a small landscape architecture firm based in Ann Arbor, Shannan has focused her work in Southeast Michigan and always on projects that are ecologically sensitive and innovative. The studio's design projects aim to strengthen the relationship between us humans and the spaces we inhabit. For nearly 3 decades, Shannan has been both designing projects and following them through the construction process, making her experience in ecological design a deeply practical one. Shannan is also very involved in her community, sharing her expertise by volunteering on several local commissions and boards. I actually met Shannan when I first came here, 7 years ago about, in my tenure as a dean, when we both served on the Ann Arbor Environmental Commission. And it was a very fun and productive experience working with Shannan. She is frequently invited to speak publicly about her work, and she has received the Washtenaw County's Excellence in Environmental Leadership Award in 2020. So she's a real leader. So we are honored to have Shannan here tonight to learn more about her tremendous work. So please join me in welcoming her. And to make sure you listen and are ready to pummel each other with questions and whatever else, there's going to be a reception after this up in 2315. So just keep that in mind, and we'll remind you when we're done with the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, first the tech test. Is it doing it? Yes? Okay. And I'm trying to keep myself on track here. We'll see how well I do. Alrighty. It is really exciting to be here. It's really wonderful to be back on my home turf. And there were so many skills that I learned here that have completely informed what I do today, and around ecological systems and understanding people. But really, the values of SEAS got deep inside of me. And that has really what has propelled me forward in my career. And I've really had the privilege of being able to practice that for the 27 years that I've been practicing. So today I'm going to share some of the triumphs and some of the total fails with you so that you can learn about how I've learned how to implement these values. So I'm going to try to do a little dirty laundry here too, so that you get to benefit from all of the experimentation. This is where I see landscape architects, that we are in that overlap between human needs and ecosystem needs. And that says it really simply. I think InSite, my firm, is in a smaller sliver of this, where we are really trying to crack the code of what people will accept and be inspired by from living systems in all of their messiness, and what they can actually take in and find beautiful and be comfortable in and function in. So we are really trying to understand that gradation between people and ecosystems so that we can find that sweet spot in between where we live. So today I'm going to talk about principles that I have kind of discerned over time, and also practices about truly, I think the biggest piece here is dealing with planting and people, because that's the stuff that people seem to react to the most. And so I'm going to take you through the things that have held true for me over time as I've designed these systems. So I'm going to start with principles. So the overview of it is always start from the site. The site is going to tell you so much. That's really what's going to inform everything that you do. The second one is do no harm. The third is that ecosystem health is one of your clients too, even though your client may not know that. The fourth is understanding the humans, because boy, if you don't, it all just may get mowed down, and I've had that happen a couple of times. The fifth is multifunctionality, so things operating on many levels at the same time. And the sixth is telling the site story. Okay, starting from the site. Really, this program has taught me how to be a really good Sherlock Holmes on sites. It's how to conduct forensics. And so what I'm going to do is take you through a site that I had, I think this was back in 2013. This is a couple that had wanted to build on this site. They wanted to build 2 studios. It was 160 acres, and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And they had spent a lot of time on this site. But taking them through this really opened up a whole different dimension for them in terms of their relationship with the site. And I feel like landscape architects have a really unique role to be able to play with that. So in terms of forensics, one of the first things we do is look at the remnant ecosystems and where they are. Old aerials will tell you a lot about these things. This is an aerial from 1940. The design starts from there, because you're protecting the things that are intact, and the places that are trashed already, highly disturbed zones, then you can put things in those places. So that's a really massive starting point for us. If you look at the picture in the lower left, you're going to see, this is me going out to the site in the wintertime. Even in the wintertime, there's all kinds of things that the site will tell you. You can see these intact kind of forests areas over here. And then you can see all these pioneer species coming in here. It's just all the standing dead. That's where things were cultivated from farmland. And then you have this massive bur oak, which clearly at one point was out like this in its open reach in a sunny spot in a savanna condition. But then as the woods grow up around it, all those lower branches start to come off. And so you start to see the change around all of that. The next piece is water. So going out to this site, I can look across here and see that even though it's at the top of the hill, there's reed canary grass going up there. You know what that means? There is perched groundwater at the top of the hill. When you see perched groundwater at the top of the hill, water flows downhill. We all get that, right? So something funny is happening up there. This whole site was completely this mosaic of small little wetlands all over it. And that's why this site, which was incredible, 160 acres, but it still hadn't been developed yet. And you can tell And these are, I could have put 56 arrows on this thing. All these little tiny white spots, that's somebody desperately looking to find soils that percolate to build a septic system. And they went over and over and over and over again, all throughout the whole site. There was one spot in this 160 acres that actually perked. So you think for a 160 acre site, you should be putting housing there, you should be doing, you really can't, because it wouldn't support humans. This is only going to support humans if you have a spot that you can deal with the waste that comes out of that. So, and there were these little piles that had things growing on them and stuff like that. So again, walking around, being that forensics expert to see what is happening on the site, to have it tell you the story. And then more with water. This is that giant bur oak. Look what it decided to levitate out of the soil. This is an old pipe from draining the whole area from some farmer from who knows how long ago. And then when I was walking around one of these intact woodlands, dry oak hickory forest, shallow depression that I'm in, and here I see a pawpaw tree. That doesn't belong, right? So this is telling me where water is, even though it wasn't spring, even though the standing water wasn't there anymore. All these things are telling me what the site is doing. So the other piece is really understanding plant communities. That is absolutely critical. And going out, this is a site called the Ojibwe Prairie, which is in Canada, just over in Windsor, which is a fabulous, fabulous place to go visit. Highly, highly recommend it. We go do this every year, where we go to really high quality intact systems in our office so that people can learn from them and calibrate their vision to understand how things grow in these conditions, what the species are, the patterns of their growth, who is growing with who. It's super, super, super important to be able to design anything, to have that set of standards and relationships and patterns in your mind. It's really important, just even in our daily lives, even when it's not a super pristine, wonderful system, to pay attention to what's growing together. Pay attention to what you're hearing, what you're smelling, seeing what the soils are potentially like. Pay attention. Unplug yourself. It's really hard right now because we're all so addicted to our phones, but that's how you learn who wants to grow with who, because you're going to learn a ton even from a vacant field, that's next to the parking lot somewhere. So really what this has, what I didn't realize when I was in school is how much of a translator and narrator that I would become as a connection between people's experience of their land. And there are just not very many times where somebody's going to hire an ecologist to come to their site and tell them what's going on there. And so landscape architects from this program are in a really unique position to be able to be that translator for people. And it's very powerful. People always kind of come away going like, wow, I never knew that. So it can really be an exciting thing to be a part of, because people just open up new dimensions. So the second principle is do no harm. Some of these are pretty obvious. You're not going to shunt a bunch of water onto your neighbor's property or waste or things like that, or we don't want to plant invasive plants. All these things are, not all these things, many of these things are enshrined in code, but the larger principle that I want to illustrate is in the photograph, which you're thinking, what's going on with this photograph? This is a park that had this gorgeous woods on it, wet woods on it. In fact, it was a funny woods because it had incredibly dry species growing, like sassafras in sand, next to wetland species like buttonbush, like literally within 10 feet of each other. And what that's telling me is that there's sand on top, there's a clay layer underneath, and water sitting on top of that. There was tons of flooding in this neighborhood. They were having all kinds of issues. They had this big park next to them, and so the wise city officials said, let's write a grant to make a rain garden here. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut down the trees to be able to make a rain garden for the neighborhood. So that was the request for proposal that went out. An engineer called me and said, do you want to be on our team? And I was like, no, not if they're going to do that. I said, I'll be willing to be on the team if you tell them that we will take a completely different approach. And so he did, and we got the job. So sometimes you need to think outside of the box in terms of doing no harm as well. The other thing is that in your designs, you will always have impacts. What you can do, though, is make it better in other places. Make it a net positive in terms of the whole project. You can improve water management. This is a project that we did. It was an old farm field, literally 2 feet down from the hedgerows because the erosion was so intense for that farm field. So house goes on here, it's got solar, it literally captures every drop of water that it has and it uses it inside of the house. It's a really incredible house on the part of the Living Building Challenge. And we were able to improve habitat all the way through. You can see where water is flowing. There's permaculture everywhere. They not only have native plants, but they have orchards that are growing there as well. We were able to improve the soils through this whole process. And we did a ton of invasive management removal with the house itself because we put it in a disturbed area right in the middle of one of these old hedgerows. But there was one tree in it. There was this beautiful hawthorn you can see in that lower right photo. And the whole house is revolving around this hawthorn tree. So it ended up becoming this kind of standalone feature of the project. Okay, water for number 3, which is ecosystem health is one of your clients, even though your client may not understand that. So we do a lot of stormwater management. And this is part of the Adolph Garden on Belle Isle, where we got a $500,000 grant from the Wilson Foundation to be able to bring water off the road and treat it next to the garden that's up there. And I'll get into that project a little bit more later. We design inlets all the time. We have never done the same inlet twice. Harry Sheehan is here and he can tell you that because he has been the recipient of many of these designs. It's just something we're constantly tinkering with, constantly trying to figure out how to do it in the best way. So what we really want to do is slow that water down, cool it down, and have it infiltrate through plant uptake. So that's a key part of what we do. Okay, here comes some of the dirty laundry part. So this is the Ann Arbor Municipal Center, which is the side on 5th Avenue, City Hall, essentially. And there's all this water coming off of the roof. It's going into these bioswales next to the building. We have a bunch of redbuds there. We planted the whole ground layer with all this stuff. This is back in the days when I just listened to the engineer and never talked back to the engineer. Those days are long gone, and I'll tell you why. Because what they decided to do is to put a whole bunch of limestone, crushed limestone, underneath this planting. Well, guess what? Limestone has a pH of like 8.9. It's terrible for plants. There are like very rare systems in northern Michigan along Lake Huron where there are limestone pavements called alvar systems, which there's a few plants that will grow in this, but there's not a lot of plants that are growing this. So they changed the system because what we are trying to do is to not do a math problem by figuring out how much water goes into that. We are trying to make a living system, something that the plants want to grow in, something that ends up getting all the soil bacteria and fungal relationships and mycorrhizal things all happening in it, because that's really what is making this thing work, is the living part of it, not the stone. So all the plants on the ground layer died. The redbuds made it, but none of the other plants. There's like a few stragglers. They should just take them out because they just look like crap at this point. It's one of those like walk by and kind of pretend that I don't see that sorts of things. But this is why I'm telling everybody, so that you question engineers and you think about what the system is that you're creating so that you will make it a dynamic, living thing that can continue. Because that's the point, right? So the next piece is ecosystem function with habitat and native plants. Okay, so this is just the backbone, a lot of what we do. This is Huron Hills Golf Course. This is where we had to work really closely with the golf staff to figure out. This is a creek that was kind of straight channel to the Huron River. We worked with an engineer that ended up doing all the meanders in the creek. We did all the habitat stuff and a lot of the grading for it too, around this thing. And did all kinds of habitat restoration. Everything had to be at certain heights based on where the tees were and all that kind of thing. So we had all these different mixes based on the golf game, but also working with the ecosystem that was there. It didn't take long for that great blue heron to move in and claim that territory after that was there. I doubt it would have happened prior to this project. This is another one where if you look in that lower left photo there, this is a woman that lived next to a creek and had this, I don't know, probably 2 acres of just flat old lawn right next to the creek, perfect floodplain area, right? We saw in old aerials that it was, probably hadn't been plowed. And so this is just one of those things that like wanted to be what it was, right? It wanted to be a floodplain. It was like, sometimes it's really hard to establish the native stuff. This just, it just wanted to be there. So that site analysis and understanding that there wasn't too much disturbance, it totally wanted to be part of that whole floodplain thing, made it happen so much more easily. So all from seed and all just came in beautifully. Okay, here's another thing where designing for evolution and change is really important, but it can also be really difficult depending on the project. So the image on the bottom, that's Sterling Relief Drain. We're on mile 3 now of doing this massive, like it's a huge drainage channel that we've ended up naturalizing. So like big, huge area, all seed. We can do all kinds of things in there, things that are going to come up quickly, things that aren't going to germinate for another 10 years, so that all those things can be part of that system. However, that is not every project. A lot of projects are much smaller. People are looking at it, the eyeballs are on it much more close. And so you have to think about like how to make this legible, how to make it so people can take care of it and understand it, because most maintenance folks don't know that there's 50 different species in there and what's what. So we ended up doing these big kind of monochromatic plantings, and that nice big swath in the middle there, that's viburnum dentatum. Well, 2 years after we put that in, viburnum beetle came in and ate all of it. And there was nothing to replace it. So, but it's tough because I don't think we could have done that image on the bottom in that area either. But having a little bit more variety would have helped us out. The other piece is that this is also at City Hall. We did this beautiful stand of switchgrass along 5th Avenue, and we put in these great hybrid elms, and they grew so fast that they shaded the whole thing out, and it's all gone now. So that's another piece. It's tough though, because in the beginning it really is sunny. So it's just one of those things where having more variety in there probably helps. Okay, so designing for humans. This is so important because we're the ones that have the power to make it go away as well. So this was a multifamily family housing development in Eastern Michigan University. And we put a rain garden in the middle of this complex that was also a playscape. And so when I arrived, these kids were picking the strawberries off of the strawberry island, and they were running up and down the little stump path. This clearly was something that they wanted to engage with, and that's what you really want, right, is to be able to have that level of engagement. So part of being in this program exposed me to Steve and Rachel Kaplan, which were a huge part of really me learning about how to design for people. And that class that I took with Stephen really made me much more aware of my own sense in physical space, of my own kind of somatic physical experience. And I feel like we really have to do that ourselves, do that work ourselves, to pay attention to what feels claustrophobic, what feels too exposed, where do I feel calm, what feels exciting, all those kinds of things, to start to understand your body in those spaces, because we're heads, but we're also bodies. And we have deep evolutionary, pasts that help inform how we feel in different places. It's not universal, most of it, but there are big themes, and you have to understand you to be able to understand somebody else. And so when we first started doing work in Detroit, we really needed some help with that, because it was a really different set of folks in terms of what their experience in physical space was. So we partnered with the East Side Community Network, which is a community organization on the east side of Detroit. And Detroit had just passed their new stormwater ordinance, and they wanted to be able to demonstrate how to be able to take water off the road and do it beautifully and things like that. So we partnered with them, and they were amazing at being able to give us context for how to understand how to do this in Detroit. So number one was that we had to find a site, and that took like half the time, because They didn't want a neighborhood that was too well off, doing too well, but they didn't want one that was too far gone either, because they had said that there had been this whole big stormwater thing happened in Detroit, looked at all the vacancies, say, oh, look, we can put all these things in all these vacant areas for stormwater. Wouldn't this be great? All the technical stuff worked. Well, they put them out there, out in the middle of nowhere, and people took the plants because it didn't look like it was meant for anything. And so they wanted us to come in with their guidance to pick the right spot that felt like, okay, this is intentional. This makes sense here. So they also wanted it on a corner because visibility was super important. Mid-block was much less secure if you're walking by and you have to kind of look in. They wanted to be able to see across it. So that was a whole other component. They did all of the community engagement. They went door to door. They talked to people. They showed people things. And it was a real learning experience for us to go through that, because context matters. So this is some of the vacancy in Detroit that I'm talking about. And so if you put a little bean of a rain garden out there, it just doesn't look like it's anything. And it also looks like, is this just part of kind of the wildness that feels scary around me because people aren't taking care of things? You can get away with this in Ann Arbor though, because it's surrounded by a bunch of lawn. So you can totally do, this is on Stone School Road, a project that we did where it's big, long area where we took all the road runoff. And the context is neat and controlled. And so having something like that there reads very differently than having something like that in Detroit. So here's another fail I'm going to share with you. So this was pretty early in my career. This was a development that we did where we worked with the township, came up with this whole new way of doing kind of restoration stuff in terms of tree replacement, where we did all this like habitat restoration instead, and we got all these variances, and it was this whole thing. We worked it into the code of the development, so you couldn't have any non-native stuff there. You know, you only owned 3 feet out from your house. Everything else was controlled by the HOA. Blah blah blah. I had my little lawn band around the prairie. I was good to go. Right? Had my cues to care. I was good. And I went back in 10 years, and it had all been mowed down. So you have to start where people are. It's super important because it will be mowed down if you don't. And it's tough with homes because they change and things like that, and some guy becomes the head of the homeowners association and he doesn't like it, and things happen and they evolve, and that's part of the story, but it's really important. So one of the things that we do with people is we do a visual preferences inventory with them. And we make one for every client, and it's all different for each one based on kind of the feeling that we get from them about how far out on the edge of natives they are. And we show them pictures and we have them react. And that has been a huge tool for us to understand where people are within that, because we find verbal is like pointless. They have to look at pictures. So designing for humans also means designing for the maintenance management people. Here's the Pittsfield Branch Library, and there was this band of lawn, and then there was this band of prairie, and it had annual rye coming up, and the lawn people went out there and said, oh, look at all these little broadleaf things coming up in the lawn, and they herbicided the entire project. So we talked to the client about this, but we really needed that maintenance guy at the meeting. So designing for the maintenance humans is also really important too. So this is what it looks like now. What the library did is they asked us, we rewrote their request for proposal for maintenance. So we did it for all their libraries. We pulled apart the mow and blow and snow people from the native people. We made maps of everything. We gave lists of duties for everything, and now it's working. But the mow and blow people do not do the prairie thing. Just keep that in mind. So code. This is another part of the human world that is messy and difficult, and I remember not really getting it in school. It's a big thing that you will have to work through. As Dean Overpeck said, I was on the Planning Commission, and boy, I learned code in a whole different way from being on the Planning Commission. And I learned kind of the nuances of it and the places where you could stretch it and the places where you can't, because knowing where people are going also really helps you be able to kind of work that line. It made me a way better designer at getting through systems, which was a great thing for us just as a firm. And I was able to change a lot of code for sustainability. Like a lot. All kinds of things changed while I was there. It was really great to be able to work on that. So giving back to your community, and also, landscape architects really need to be part of these systems. Really, it's like people relied on what I said for some of these things because you're going to have experience with it. It's really a great way to give back. Okay, multifunctionality, number 5. So you want to try to get rid of invasive stuff, right? I have rarely been on a project where somebody says, I'm fine about spending $10,000 just removing all the invasives, okay? What they will spend money on, though, is their view. I have removed dozens and dozens of acres of invasive, awful, woody crap that is so hard to get rid of because of people's views. So if you can layer on habitat and ecosystem health with human desires and have that happening on both levels in terms of multifunctionality, you can really take it somewhere. We've done a lot of libraries here. This is Malice Creek Library. This is where we did our first bioswales 25 years ago. And this serves as water management, as habitat. You have to kind of cross these bridges in order to be able to get into the library in the first place, so you're really aware of water processes. And again, it's just like working on many, many levels because it's shading the parking lot, it's doing all kinds of things. So you want things to have more than one purpose in your designs. So this is back to that Pittsfield branch library where the maintenance people herbicided everything. This is when they first were doing the design, they bought this piece of land, and it seemed like enough land, but it was bisected by a creek. And it meant that the program literally could not fit on the site. And we found out from the architects who was saying, oh, we got our soil borings back and we had these terrible soils, and now we have to drill these huge piers down into the ground to be able to support the building because it's this really slimy clay. And we were like, oh, that's an opportunity for us, because what that meant is that we could put the 100-year storage of the stormwater underneath half of the building. So all of a sudden, everything fit on the site, and things didn't have to be crazy steep and stuff like that. And with that, the end of the library, which is where everybody hangs out, is literally jutting over the wetland at the end, which is this beautiful place to be. So what was a pain in the butt for the architect ended up being a huge opportunity for us. Then these, of course, the native stuff is the ultimate multifunctionality tool that you have. There's all the stuff that we know about, which is, carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, part of the food energy flow, biodiversity, it goes on and on and on. Plus all the things that we don't even know yet, right? Because people are studying these things and we're learning more and more every day, which is super amazing and exciting. So using natives is really like you kind of check the box in so many ways if you can use them. This is a project for a university that is doing kind of cellular research. And for a lot of reasons, we came onto the project really late. And so the budget had already been developed. This is a $150 million project, and we had $36,000 for the site landscape. But they had $700,000 set aside for an underground stormwater system, which does one thing, right? It stores that water, and then it just kind of meets it out in little bits into the city system. So we said, well, let's take your $700,000 and add our $36,000 to it, and all of a sudden we have a $736,000 to spend on your stormwater system, on your landscape, on the places where you can hang out, all these different things together to create a multifunctional system. So we created this concept around cells, because that's what they're studying in the building, to be able to make these pods of cells out in the landscape where we found out that a lot of grad students that work on this stuff want to be on their laptops working outside with all their data. So we've set up these cells out in the landscape for people within these larger cells of stormwater management, which is habitat, which is all the different things that we've been talking about. Okay, number 6, tell the site stories. So this is Oudolph Garden, Detroit, and this is on Belle Isle. Piet Oudolph is a Dutch rock star garden designer, plantsman. And there's like nobody better than him in terms of plant combination stuff. I mean, he's truly incredible. And he was written to by a group of folks, invited him to Detroit. He accepted the invitation, and he put together this whole plan. And keep in mind the guy is Dutch, okay? Because that's really, really important. And think about their relationship to sea level, okay? So that's what happened to the site when the Great Lakes rose. And Piet is one of those guys that, like, because he's Dutch, he just kind of thought we could engineer our way out of anything with these things, because it's like they have a giant wall around, around their coastline. But we could not do that for the Great Lakes here. And what ended up happening is we had to change the entire design. And I think it's a better design than it was going into it. And so this is the upper level, and you can see kind of the walls. What we did is we ended up raising this whole thing up here. This is basically a giant container planting, is what it is. And this is where the rain garden is going to go, and this is this lower area down beneath where that Carillon is from that photo. And so in order to be able to have the pH that Piet wanted and the soil texture that Piet wanted, we had to go through just huge processes to be able to make it perfect for all of his plants. So this is just our drainage plan to show all the layers of aggregate and drains and things like that to be able to get this thing to be well drained enough to be able to support the plant. So this is not our usual way of working in the world, but it was really interesting to go through it with him. And then with the grading, we had to scoop out all this stuff down at the bottom because we were in the floodplain of the Detroit River. So we had to permit with many different agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers. And so with that, because this has all been filled in, right? This was like, Belle Isle was pretty swampy, and in the 1800s, people filled in huge portions of it. So we were able to dig that area out. Piet could have his great area up on top, and you can see kind of in that lower area where the water is sitting. Well, that became a huge opportunity also, because Piet does all the plants, we did everything else. We did all the engineering, all the permitting and everything. But for this wet meadow area over here on the right, we suddenly got to be a lot more involved. So this is his like eye candy, amazing stuff up on top. And then we got to be much more involved in the plants down below. And we mapped out, all these little tiny gradations of water were happening. That Ojibwe Prairie place that we went to was hugely informative for us, because that's just a few miles away in terms of what the plant communities are like. And we got to put together all these plants. Finally, we got to say, hey, we can do 100% native here, isn't that great? And Piet did some native things up on top, but this was really purely native down here. And then he was able to pick from that for the palette. He didn't do as much of a kind of layout of the plants, but he definitely had a big involvement. For the first 2 years in that lower area, we did sedges and rushes, and then we controlled for invasives in there. And then just last June, volunteers got out there and put together, installed thousands of forbs, of flower plugs in there. And this is in September after that last June, so things are really starting to come in. And so the story here is very different. It's like two stories going on. One is sort of create your new story, which is up on top. And then this lower story is about what's happening with water, what's happening with native plants, and that we needed, it's about resiliency too, right? Being able to see this thing raised up and understanding that that's part of the site's past too. Okay, so practice. So how do you do this? And again, this is really getting into how you're dealing with the native plants part of it, because that's the part that is, I think, the stickiest part that's difficult for people. So I'm going to talk about structure, talk about the plants themselves, texture, massing and legibility, planting in layers, line, the art of distraction, and color. Okay, so this is the City Hall up at the front, and I'm showing you this to kind of give you a sense of how the building is oriented. So all this water is coming down, coming out of these scuppers into this lower area here. And you can see kind of these zones here, these columns coming off, you know, with these scuppers coming down. And so we have this whole system, and structure is part of what holds this thing together. So we've got these bands coming off of the building, and where water is running along these bluestone areas, and then they get translated up into pathways up at the top. This bridge that goes over it is part of what makes this thing hang together. It's like this big, bold, powerful move that allows you to be much messier around it. So structure can really help you with this. This is kind of the little upland area. You can see some of those access paths that are playing off of the building architecture. This is a project for Meadowlark in town here. They had an old schoolhouse that was a part of their office complex, and they needed a ramp to go up to it. And so we did this Corten steel wall that kind of wraps around and is a really big structural component of how that site hangs together as well. Everything is native here as well. But again, that helps really give it some structure and some bones. This is 618 South Main, which is an apartment complex on Main Street. And it's the way it works is everything is up that people are in. So there's bridges, there's a pool area, and the rain gardens are kind of lower and down on the side. So again, you can kind of get away with a lot more that way. And then this is the Great Lakes Garden, which Dean Overbeck talked about. And the structure here is a little softer. It's a little less kind of gutsy and kind of tight, but it still is an important way to move through these 9 different endemic gardens that you go through that represent different Great Lakes ecosystems. So here's the structure. You can see when we're building this thing, all this stonework, what the paths look like, what the walls look like, that's part of what really holds this thing together. And then this is it in the wintertime. So that structure really comes out in the winter and helps hold it together. And then here it is in the summertime, it kind of disappears more. So that structure can really help pull things together. Here's a site where, again, all this planting is native. A couple of boxwood that the wife really wanted to have there, so we're cool with that. But we have this whole bluestone bridge that went over things. You have the columns of the fence and the fence itself. Everything was very neat, but everything is all native in this area. Okay, plants. We are super plant forward, and Lindsay, who worked for me in the past, knows that I am super picky about plants. I'm passionate about native stuff, but like leaf color, texture, form, how you're handling all this stuff, I'm really into that stuff, and I get super picky about it. So this is a big part of our office and how we operate with this. We are not purists. We don't do 100% native stuff at all. We use native cultivars or nativars sometimes. We use plants from our region, not just from our county. We have clients that want it to just be from the county, but we'll pull from a larger area. And we'll use non-native plants for sure, especially if the client is interested in something, or if like deer are a huge issue, which is really common these days, or salt or heat island effect or things like that, then we go into them. But we always try to work mostly from natives if we can. The other thing is starting in the winter. That's what I do. So I start with the structure. I start with the grasses that are going to be up. I start with the woody stuff that is going to be up and think about what it looks like in the wintertime. And then thinking about the plants themselves, what are they native to? You can't just stick a native plant that is completely out of its normal context in the middle of something else. So here you have this gorgeous dogwood in its proper place in the understory of a beautiful forest, right? You can't put it in the middle of a parking lot surrounded by pavement, okay? I don't care if it's native or not. It would be better to put some other plant in there that's not native that's going to actually survive. You can't just torture plants in that way. So you need to respect where they come from, and you need to have the design support the plant's needs and set them up for success. That's really what you want. Okay, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of images here fast around different looks. This is texture. So grasses with broadleaf plants can look great. This is prairie dock next to Amsonia. Like these textural differences can really make things read and pop. This is my own rain garden. This has a bunch of wild ginger next to early meadow rue. This is prairie dropseed and strawberry together. This is the hawthorn tree that I said everything was kind of organized around. Texture can be in other forms too. This is a crossing between two rain gardens. So stone can be textural too. This is like stone ballast from ships from the 1800s that were in storage in Detroit, and we used them for a driveway that's right next to bluestone. So these textural things can really help make things read as well. Massing and legibility. So grouping things together can really make a big, huge difference. So this is kind of goldenrod next to switchgrass. This is looking from a different direction in the same area, different textures together. That's those same things together with Amsonia. So again, these massing of things together can sometimes make it more legible and easier to kind of take in. Okay, here's that risk part of massing though, is what I talked about. Here's that viburnum that got eaten. So doing it again, I would mix that with something else so it wasn't so vulnerable. Here we use kind of smaller polygons of massing so that if something fails, then something next to it can grow in. And now we've really started getting like where we're doing kind of patterns of things out there and layering a lot. Weeding is a whole lot less when we use this method, but the planting plans can look utterly nutsoid. And so what we've started doing is creating different mixes and then showing how they layer on top of one another to be able to have kind of a base layer, accent layers, groups, and then like filler things in between. So we're kind of shifting the way we're doing some of these things in order to be able to put them in. So it's a little less crazy for contractors to do that. Another huge thing is line, especially in between lawn and where you have native areas, having it play off of like the creek here. This is at that golf course, using pathways to be able to create that line and carry your eye through something that is otherwise maybe a little overwhelming. And then swales, things like that, can really lead your eye to places. This is in my front yard. This is just a little simple straight line of nodding wild onion. Sometimes that can be effective too. Okay, this is what I call the art of distraction. Sometimes native plants look awesome, and sometimes they look absolutely terrible. And this one looks like this every single year after it blooms. This is Monarda. There's Monarda all through this design, but you can't tell, right? Because I'm forcing you to look at other things that are more interesting. So you'd have to think about the things that look bad to humans and what you may be able to use to be able to kind of cover up that or just distract people from that. Same thing with Rudbeckia. This is the fish park. I hope all of you have gone to this. This is such a great park. This is full of Rudbeckia. You can't tell all those like moldy stems are sitting there, right? Because there's other amazing things to look at, including the fish, which are so great. Talk about storytelling. That's a great park. So the last thing is color, because everybody always wants to start with color, and I'm making you do it last, because all these other things will carry you and will look really good, and then the color is just the kind of cream on the top. Sometimes with native plants, we'll make the color palette really restricted. And this one we just stuck with kind of mauves and purples and maroons. And that can kind of make it look a little pithier and easier to take in. This is one where we did much more with kind of greens and chartreuses and yellows. That helianthus in the back, this is at the 200-person huge tower on Main Street, which used to be a big, massive parking lot, and there were goldfinches all over this thing. So goldfinches all over the apartment complex with 200 people. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, you can do these things and get away with it and still have people and wildlife together. This is Susan Bryan, who's a colleague of mine, and she, I gotta get going here. I'll talk really fast. She did a garden all in white natives. And then sometimes contrast is really fun. And then of course, and then red I'm really careful with, actually. That one is one I just gotta be careful with red. It's a tough one to combine with things. And then there's just the Happy Riot. This is just somewhere in a park in Ann Arbor that someone put together. Just go for it, put it all together, just have it be happy chaos, that's what I call it, which is awesome to do too. But sometimes having those other strategies can kind of pull you through it in a way that makes it a little easier to digest. So I feel like we have done a lot of good work in Michigan, and I've told you a lot about how the principles and the practice get expressed through all of that, but I haven't told you about a program that has had way bigger impact that I've been a part of. And I'm gonna call out Harry Sheehan here, who was my classmate here at SEAS. He was a policy student. We were in the same master's project. And he took a look at, I think it was Westgate parking lot. He couldn't make anybody do anything about all the stormwater just rushing off of these acres and acres and acres of parking. And so he said, I'm gonna write a grant for the equivalent amount of that area, and I'm gonna write the grant for it to be people's roofs and driveways in rain gardens instead. And so he brought us on, and for I don't know, a good 5 or 6 years, we probably designed 10 rain gardens a year. And we went to people's homes and we met with them and we showed them images, and people built them, and the program evolved a lot as it went through. And then it got the bright idea of teaching people how to do it. So we started partnering up with Susan Bryan, who was the white rain garden there, and we team taught this class together for 8 years. And we learned a ton doing this thing. We learned a lot from actually designing them on our own too, and then implementing them. So that program started, I think, in the class in 2011. In 2016, we got a grant to be able to put it online on YouTube. And the class was always full before. When it went online on YouTube, we did live classes there, and we had over 100 people each time taking this class. And what was amazing is that there was a Facebook group that you could join where you could submit your designs and have people say, yeah, you can do this, or no, you can, or whatever. And people could go from that kind of like, oh, can I do this? Can I actually do this? You really can, because you have this community of people around you that were going to help you do it. And this program has completely taken off, because not only are people taking it online and joining this group, but Susan has created this incredible system of now training other trainers, taking it to Ohio. So just in the rain gardens total from this program, there's over 2,000 of these rain gardens from this project that Harry started a long, long time ago. The gallons, 23 million, that's way more than all of my projects put together. So the effect of this, like Jana, who's working for me right now, I don't know where Jana is, she's like, you should put a map together of all the projects that you've done in Michigan. And I was like, oh, when am I gonna have time to do that? But this map actually shows so much more of the reach of what you can do. Like, I'd never be able to design all these things, right? But teaching other people how to do their own little bean in their own yard makes a massive, massive difference. So there are all different kinds of ways to be able to have an impact with landscape architecture. And this is one of the ones that I feel like who knew when this thing started, the reach that it would have, but it really has. Okay, I'm gonna say something that is gonna get me in so much trouble in this next slide. So I completely anthropomorphize plants. I'm just gonna admit it right now. And I think about basically making plants happy. Because what that really means is that I get the ecosystem that they come from. I know the soils that they want to be in. I know who their friends are, who they want to be with in that plant community that they have. I understand the hydrology. I understand all that data, right? But really, I'm trying to make the plants successful and thrive, which really, in my heart, not in my brain, but in my heart, is making the plants happy. Because once the plants are happy, everything else flows from that. The soils start to develop. The insects start to come. The birds start to come. And it's like okay, this is so not this part of my life anymore, but back when I was like living in the dorm and you had a party and you invited the right people, and there were maybe like 10 people, but they were the right people, and then all of a sudden other people start showing up and it starts getting bigger and bigger, and it's really, really fun, and it's because you invited those 10 right people. That's kind of like putting the right planting plan together, because things just start showing up because of all of the networks and relationships from the power of these plants. But you gotta know them well to know which plants to put on the site for your client, for the site itself, for all kinds of reasons. And let me tell you, right now, it's hard to live in this world, right? Because the choices that we have in front of us are basically less bad. It's less bad to recycle. It's less bad to drive an electric car. It's less bad to like have, you know, solar on your roof, right? But you know what? This is actually good. This is actually generative. This is something that evolves and grows and changes and makes the world better. And we are essentially facilitators that are enabling these things to be able to make their magic happen. And that is a powerful thing.